Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Orbit Live event, which is a part of our How to Write Your First SFF Novel series. My name is Angela Mann. I'm a publicist at Orbit, and I have the pleasure of working with these lovely authors. Today's event is sadly our last event of the month-long series, and it's called Help, I Need More Words, which all our authors today can relate to. Just a few housekeeping things. Just a few housekeeping things before we begin. For the first 30 to 40 minutes, we'll start off with the authors discussing their experiences of adding more words to their novels, and after we'll answer some audience questions. If you have questions for the authors, you can submit them to the Q&A section, which you can find if you click the question mark icon that is on the far right-hand side of the screen if you're on a browser, and then below the video if you're on mobile. And questions can also be voted on so that the questions with the most votes will be more likely to be answered first. And we may not get to all the questions, but we'll get to as many as we can. And this event is being recorded, so if you miss any part of it or want to rewatch it later, the replay will be available right here, right after the event ends. And you'll also be able to rewatch this and the rest of the past events at the Orbit Books YouTube channel, where there's a handy playlist for the event series. And lastly, if you click through the green button below the video, you'll find the event series homepage with direct links to replay all the sessions of the How to Write Your First SFF Novel series, and links to buy all these authors' books so you can experience the words they added to their novels firsthand. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our authors today. Nicholas Eames is the author of Kings of the Wild and the sequel Bloody Rose. Aparna Verma is the author of The Phoenix King, which just came out from Orbit this past August. And Megan E. O'Keefe is the author of a number of science fiction novels, and her latest series is The Devoured Worlds, which began with The Blighted Stars. And finally, Erin M. Evans is the author of several fantasy novels, including the Usurper series, which began with The Empire of Exiles. So the topic of this panel is adding more words to your story after you thought it was done. And you might do this by adding subplots, world building, additional scenes, flashbacks, or whatever else is needed or your editors thought you needed. Can you tell us about your experience adding words to your novel or series? And if you're willing to share, what are the approximate word counts before and after the additions? Whoever would like to start, or I can call on you.
Go on, Megan.
Go ahead, Nick.
I'm being attacked.
Yeah. I offer her as tribute.
I thought we were friends, Nick. No. No, I'm fine to go first. Yeah. So my first book with Orbit, Velocity Weapon, was originally written. It was the first book that I got on subs with a Big Five publisher, which means we were taking the manuscript out and we were trying to get an editor's interest. And my previous series had been with a smaller publisher, and we weren't sure, publishing is a business, and we weren't really sure if we could sell like a whole trilogy right out the gate to Big Five. So I had originally written the book as a sort of standalone with series potential. Those are the magic words in publishing. If you're trying to sell a trilogy or a series, it's standalone with series potential. As a thriller, it was just Xanda's point of view. It was just the one character's point of view. And I had all these plans for the world building in the greater universe. And it was about 84,000 words. Actually, I looked it up because I wrote it 6 years ago, so I had to go back and check. But it was really tight. It was really fast. It had a lot more thriller pacing and vibes than a traditional space opera would. Bree, who is my editor at Orbit, loved it. She called me and she said, "This is wonderful, but I want it to be a space opera trilogy. Can you give me more?" She's like, "I want at least another point of view. Preferably a third," and we did sort of like a 1.5, 1.5 point of view. And I was like, absolutely. All that stuff was already there. It was sort of hiding beneath the bones. It was just a matter of bringing it to the surface. And the final book ended up being 148,000 words reference. So it was an experience, but it was something I'd wanted to do anyway. I was very happy to get to do it. And one of the really great joys of working with an editor who like loves your book and has a vision for it is that they will work with you and help you pull that stuff out. So that was a lot of fun.
Nick, why don't you go next?
Sure. Well, I'd spent about 10 to 12 years writing a giant, monstrous book that will never see the light of day before I wrote Kings of the Wild. And it had so much world building, too much world building, some might say. The other day, in fact, I saw a Facebook memory that reminded me that after I had worked on it for another 2 years and carved it down, it was a svelte 270,000 words. And I had taken about 40,000 words out at the time, so it was monstrous, too monstrous. And so when I wrote Kings of the Wild, I set out to just not do any of that. I didn't world build whatsoever. If I needed something, I just kind of made it up on the spot, and I was just trying to go with it. So it was pretty much the polar opposite of what I've been doing for the decade prior. And then when I got an agent for it, when I finished it, it was 120,000 words. And when I got an agent for it, she's like, I love it. Can we take it down to 100,000 before it goes on sub? And I said, sure. Took out all like the ands and buts and thens and managed to snip it down to 100,000 words. And then when we sold it to Orbit, they were like, great, we love it, but we would like it to be 50,000 words bigger. And so, but there was a bunch of kind of flashback scenes, about 10,000 words they wanted gone, but then 50,000 words bigger. So, yeah, so I kind of started then and probably wrote the most I've ever written in my entire life at Tim Hortons overnight, over and over and over again. Tim Hortons is like the greatest place in the world here in Canada, by the way. And yeah, so in the end, I think it ended up being 136,000 words, something like that. And they were satisfied with that.
Erin or Aparna, whoever would like to go next.
So for Empire of Exiles, I, much like Nick, I wrote a really big fat book. I actually, before I published with Orbit, I wrote D&D novels, and they let me write very fat books. So when I came out with my very fat book and found out it's very hard to debut, even though I had already written 7 books, I was still a debut with a really fat book. I said, okay, fine, I'm going to write a really short one. So I tended to write like a lot of points of view, and so I decided I was only going to do, first it was 2 and then it was 3, and it was about 103,000. I got, my agent was very interested in it, and she said, "There's a problem though. This is getting a little murky here. You really ought to make this other character have a point of view, because it's a mystery novel. The investigator really should have a point of view, not just the keys to the morgue." So I was like, I tried so hard not to put too many points of views in, but I added him back in, which was very much the right thing to do. And that sort of ended up expanding the story. I cannot find a Word document version of the final copy of Empire of Exiles. I think it's about 120, 130, about there. But it made the story work a lot better. It did not need to be that thin, to be honest.
Yeah, I had it's interesting. So I my journey was a little different. So I had first self-published my book back in August 2021, and it was called The Boy with Fire, because I'm great with titles, and it did really well. It was picked up by lots of readers, went viral on social media, and actually by some chance, I think it was Alex, part of the marketing team, who had heard murmurings about it on Twitter and said it to my former editor Priyanka Krishan, and he said, like, hey, I think this is a book that might fit, like, your vibe, like, take a look. And so when I was talking to Priyanka, she had already started reading the book, and I think at about then it was like 137,000 words, and Priyanka told me I need more. And so it ended up being 167,000 or something. Like, I remember adding like 30,000 more. So I don't have a Word. I was trying to find the Word document as I'm like going through this. I only have like the galley, the PDF galley, and I don't know how to pull out Word account right now on it. And so a lot of it was she wanted more world building, which I was like, hey, I'm happy to do. I love world building. I can always do more. And I think for me, it was like I wanted to save some of that for book 2, but she just kind of said, like, you know what, you don't have to, pull yourself back. Like, let us know now, like, don't keep us in the dark in some aspects. And I added a subplot to one of the main narrators that I think gave her a little bit more agency. That the self-published version didn't have as much. And so yeah, it was interesting to go from like a thin, like it was thin because I had to make the words small to cram as small page as I could to make my margins good on KDP. I was self-publishing it. But then when you have a big trad 5 author, like, they can give you a chonker. So I was like, you know what? It's a flaky chonker. And so I love it. So yeah, I added about 30,000 more words in the revision.
So a lot of you answered this a little bit already, but when did you feel like your story was complete before you started adding to it, or did you already think something was, or feel like something was lacking? And if you felt like it was complete, how did you ensure the additions were worthy of the story? Whoever'd like to go.
I have a mixed answer. I thought there was something wrong, but I couldn't see it. And my writing group was like, you're being paranoid. It's fine. It's great. Like, go for it. This is one of the reasons that I eagerly signed with my agent, was because she said, no, this is what's going on. It's right here. And I was like, yay, you can do the thing I seem not to be able to do. For me, there is a certain sense that the book is not sort of done until it's completely out of my hands done. So I wasn't sort of bothered because to sort of pull it apart and put it back together, because there is a certain sense in there that, like, there's the book and there's the expression of the book, which is a little woo, but that draft is still malleable to me. So I'm fine with, if I see the thing I want to do looks different than what I've already done, I'm happy to pull it apart. That's sort of just part of the process. But that does sometimes mean that you're going to have to kind of pull back and redo things so that it keeps the structure and the flow nice.
Nick, what do you think?
Sure. Yeah, I thought I nailed it. I thought, yeah, this is absolutely perfect. Mostly because my mom told me it was. But I didn't have a bad guy in my book, because the point of it was poking fun at a lot of fantasy tropes. So the bad guy literally was a giant faceless horde of monsters. And so when it came time when they were like, we want 50,000 more words, I was like, what? Like, what can I do to add that much words? And I was like, bad guy, perfect. So I was able to just to take him and kind of put him in scenes throughout the book, which I'd be daunted about doing now, but at the time I was like, I'm an author. I'm going to be an author. I just did it. And it worked out really well. And so, yeah, he ended up becoming a major part of the book. I should hope that someone wouldn't never think, while reading his scenes, that they were inserted later. And he ended up becoming pretty much like the prime mover for like everything that comes afterwards. Like, the second book plot wouldn't exist without him. The third book's plot wouldn't exist without him. Everything that came after, especially the stuff that's good, happened because of that addition and his character. And then I was also able to add some smaller things in there just to make things more poignant, or just to elaborate on cultures and people a bit more than I did before, going at such a breakneck pace. So, while I thought it was great at the time, it is a much, much better book now, and thankfully it enables me to build off it because of those.
I kind of had a similar reaction as well. I thought, like, what the self-published version, I was proud of, and I thought, for the reflection of who I was as a writer then, it was a pretty accurate. And I think as writers, we're constantly growing. Like, a book that we wrote 2 years ago is going to be very different from the book that we're writing now. And so when I came back, it was really weird to go back on a manuscript of a book that had already been published. And then it's like, felt like revisiting an old friend, but that friend had grown older. And so you're learning new things about them. And so when it came to some of the editions of The Phoenix King, I think just being a debut, there were some topics that I felt A little shy of discussing, specifically some more so political and religious themes, more so implications of what of my background, my family, and I think it was really this is where you have a sign of a really great editor. My editor kind of just encouraged me and almost like gave me the permission of being fearless, of being more courageous, of tackling deeper, darker topics of about alt right religion and alt right nationalism, and just leaving it on the page and letting the reader decide of where their opinion lies on the matter. But she could have, I think she sensed that I was like holding myself back. And I think that was just where I was as a writer. I just wasn't as sure of myself then. And so when I was writing The Phoenix King and revising, I kind of was able to go deeper into some of those topics, specifically the Tyrant King. I think I love a good bad guy. I love a great villain. And I think, like you said, Nick, in my book, he's kind of he's kind of the catalyst to a lot of the plot and the situations and other character relationships. And so you always need a great villain in your story. So I do love Leo.
Megan, you had sort of a unique situation where you had the whole story written but just with one POV, and then you added a couple more.
Yeah, well, I'm similar to Erin in that I don't view a book as done until it's on the shelves. Like once I can't touch it anymore, that's when it's done. But I know that I'm a short drafter by nature, not just with that book. Like anything I write, like I binge draft, so I get it out as quickly as possible, and I'm usually missing things like setting and what people are wearing and that kind of stuff. So I know I'm gonna have to go through and put stuff in the white room every time I do it. But I really enjoy, like, I'm a craft and structure person at heart, so I like the chance to take apart a story, figure out, what exactly was I trying to do when I sort of vomited out this draft in a month, right? For you nano people, what was I trying to do is a very good question when you get to the end. And how can I get there better are really good questions that I like to entertain when I'm editing anything. So, Brie gave me the chance to take that particular book completely apart and figure out how to stick it back together again. I was like in nerd heaven. This is great. I get to do spreadsheets. I love it.
So it sounds like all of you added words throughout your story. How did you match up the new chapters and scenes with what you'd already written? For example, did you ever end up with 2 Tuesdays in a row or a summer that lasted 6 months? And if you added words primarily in one place, such as a prologue, how did you make sure that new section worked smoothly with what was already there?
I'll take this one first, if you don't mind. I just kind of, for most of the stuff was all new scenes with the main character, with the new settings and things like that. And then there was maybe 1 or 2 parts where I was able to, there was other people that got in the antagonists, smaller antagonists that got in the character's way, and I was able to insert him into those scenes, and maybe he was the impetus behind their choices, kind of stuff. So for me, it was a bit of a mix. He was added to a couple scenes. Obviously, he was way added to the final battle, obviously, and yeah, but otherwise it was all new scenes, kind of sprinkled, throughout.
For me, it was I actually had to my editor asked me to add a prologue. I had an epilogue, but I had no prologue because apparently I had heard like no one reads prologues. They just skip right ahead to chapter. So I'm like, someone's not gonna read this? But she assured me, like, okay. So I added a prologue, more so to show because what happened later on in the book was that there was a flashback that kind of showed the context of the prologue. But instead of like taking it as a flashback, I just reoriented it as a prologue. So you start with that information rather than learning about it later on. Like Nick, a lot of my new scenes were kind of sprinkled out, and they mostly were centered on either there was like world building, but more so I think like a lot of the relationships between characters. So there are some new scenes between the father and the daughter in the book that I think really show how they're stubbornly, for better and for worse, very alike. And that leads to a lot of conflict where they're butting heads of like the transition of power. But I think it was also a way where I could show a little bit more of Hinduism and some of like Indian culture in the book. There's this new scene added of a Hindu funeral, which was inspired by some of the funeral rites that happen where you have like a fire. It's I what it's immolation, not immolation, but we burn when in our culture, like if you die, you don't get buried, you get put on a fire and like you're burned. And in most like in really traditional Hindu funeral rites, the women can't really bear the torch. It's usually the eldest son that does this, that cracks a pot of holy water. And in the context of the book, that was switched. The gender roles were switched, and it was the main character, the heir, who takes the funeral rites, takes the torch, and burns one of the characters. And so that was, I think, just a very touching moment for me to add. That kind of shared a little bit more about the culture that the book was drawing upon, and I think it just really encapsulated the grief of the scene and the character in that moment.
I work very chronologically, so when I have to do a revision of any kind, I will kind of start at the beginning, and the things that don't need to be adjusted particularly, you might be doing a little polish, but I kind of put myself back in that headspace, so that when I come to the thing I have to write, I've already kind of established the flow there. I will make a revision outline, sort of like chapter 1, that's fine. Chapter 2, insert new POV, that kind of thing, so you can keep track of what you need to do. The question about adding extra Tuesdays, that happens in the first draft too. So that's why we have copy editors.
Exactly.
I'm very bad at dates.
Yeah, I can make complete timelines and I'll still have like my copy editors being like, "Are you sure this is 5 days? I think it was only 4 days." And I'm like, I don't actually know how time works, apparently.
Very the same.
Yeah. But when it comes to revision is as large as Velocity Weapon, when it came to making sure everything sort of flowed together and didn't feel shoehorned in, for me, what I focused on is something that I think about a lot when I'm doing any sort of big revision. It's thematic resonance, but Aparna touched on it a little bit too, with the villain and the protagonist having these similar states that compare and contrast. But I want everything to sort of have a slight echo of each other that makes it feel more complete, more natural, more whole. There are these little tie-ins back and forth. Something I look for.
So the timing of this panel during National Novel Writing Month isn't accidental, with many writers who are probably here tonight trying to write a specific number of words per day. Do you ever try to write for a specific word count per scene or per book? And for those of you who have written multiple books, has this approach changed over time? Whoever would like to go.
I don't write in terms of there's a word count goal that I want to reach. It's more so like, I need to finish this scene. And sometimes the can of worms opens where it's like 2 days and I'm still haven't finished the scene because I'm still trying to figure out how the scene will work. And so, or maybe I come up with another idea and totally scrap this one and my outline goes out the window. That has happened so many times where outlines do not exist. Like, yeah, one page is great. As soon as you're on page 100, it goes out the window. My Alexa just went off. I don't know why she did. Telling me about the weather. But so for me, it's more so about a completion, and more so I found out, I'm writing book 2 right now, which the manuscript was due on Monday. I'm sitting it on Friday if my editor is listening to this. But one thing that I've found to be helpful to me when I'm writing, and I hope for the writers who are listening, this was like an advice that I think I heard from another writer who I don't remember now, but it was this idea of like finishing your writing session or sprint mid-scene or mid-action, so that when you return to the page, you return with a momentum of that you left on. So like if you, instead of like ending at the or stopping your writing session at the end of a scene, you stop it maybe midway. Well, you still have all these ideas and you just bullet point what you want to write next because it gives you excitement to come return to the page. So I've kind of changed my mindset in that way where instead of doing like word count or scene completion as my goal, it's more so about, can I reach this emotional point? And once I reach that emotional point, it's almost like taking my hand out of the cookie jar, even though I want to like keep going, just so that when I return to the page, I have that same enthusiasm, because we're always groaning and bitching and moaning to go back to writing. And so this is just like a little mind game that I play with myself to come back.
I actually heard that from Mary Quall, and I've been doing it ever since too. I'm not sure if she came up with it, but that's where I heard it.
Yeah, I just
great.
probably saw it on Twitter somewhere, and I was like, that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think I do something similar. I used to, I mean, to be honest, I'd forgotten that between the time when we scheduled this and today, I was like, what is it that is the topic? And I saw help, I need more words. And I'm like, I do need more words. Somebody help me. So I came on here this morning. I was like, I hope someone has some words that I could get. But I used to aim for, and this is a pretty low word count compared to what a lot of people do, at 500 words a day. And I don't usually get more than that. And I kind of stopped doing that just because I kept missing it over and over again, and it gets depressing. But boy, oh boy, like sometimes I see people with these monstrous word counts. And when I was doing those revisions, the 50,000 words, there was one day where I worked for probably 17 hours, absolutely nonstop, and I got about 1,700 words out of that full day. But that's it for me, because I usually write pretty slow. And although, yeah, I would usually try to get past the 500 word margin, but if I also was struggling with how I wanted a sentence to sound, if I got it, if I nailed that paragraph or that sentence or that idea that I was trying to get across, I'd usually stop there. I'd be too excited. I'd be like, I did it. Way to go, champ. You deserve a scone. Go get one. So yeah, I would often kind of stop after, if I struggled for a bit, I would work on it until I got that part out. Then when it was done, I was done, and hopefully come back refreshed the next morning.
I definitely, when I have a book I'm aiming to finish by a certain amount of time, I have a daily word count. I usually use Scrivener's estimates, and then when it gets out of hand, I fudge it. For me, I definitely keep writing even when it's bad because I like revising things. So coming back and fixing my crappy words the next day is energizing for me. But as for like scenes and how long scenes are, I feel like that for me tends to be kind of variable unless it's very short or very long. Like if I have a scene and it's 800 words, I kind of look askance at that because there's a possibility that works great and it's very impactful that this is a tiny scene, but it's also possible I could do this better or lump another scene in on it. Or if this chapter is 12,000 words long, maybe it doesn't need to be one chapter, or maybe that scene needs to get cut down. If there's anything that's a big outlier, but I feel like anything between 4,000 and 8,000 words is a chapter, and it is what it needs to be.
Yeah, I'm not personally someone who sets targets for myself. I know, but contractually, I'll know how long a book needs to be, right, when the editor receives it. But when I'm actually drafting, I fall into the school of thought where a scene is as long as it needs to be. It doesn't need to be a set amount of words. And Velocity Weapon actually has a scene that's like 19 lines long, like very specifically. And that's fun to do. I'm a big fan of like Agatha Christie. I don't know if anyone has read the books, but she does really cool things with, we'd probably call it head hopping now, but you'll have scenes that are like a paragraph, right? And they're incredibly impactful. And I really enjoy that. But for those who have noticed that David is teasing me in the chat, I mentioned I'm a binge writer, and that means that my usual pace when I'm drafting averages 5,000 words a day. It's not something I set out to do. Sometimes it's a little less. Sometimes I will forget to do things like eat and do like 10,000 words. But that is
Megan, help! I need more words.
So I actually the trick I have. So for me, it's I have ADD, and this is weaponized hyperfocus, like something I've sort of developed for myself. But the really big trick I have is, like, if you were having trouble getting words on the page that day, write a list of the things you're excited about for the scene. Like, get yourself sort of pumped up about what's cool about it. Like, I really want to see these two characters finally meet. Like, that's going to be a really cool moment. Like, just sort of up talk the scene or the chapter or whatever it is for yourself, even if it is the book as a whole. Make a list of the tropes that you think are cool that you're going to put in there, and that gives you little, like, pieces of candy to reach for as you're going through the draft.
So I think that's very good advice. I mean, you guys have been giving a lot of good advice throughout this discussion, but do you have any overall advice for writers looking to add length to their novels, or anything you haven't mentioned yet?
I mean, usually I feel like a lot of new authors tend to have to be told to take or like carve their novels down. It's certainly something like I wish I had known when I first wrote my first book. But then again, I like kind of grew up on big novels of the 90s, which were all massive. All the books I loved at the time were 1,000 words long. So yeah, I mean, kind of just look at what's out there these days, or yeah. I mean, I guess it's hard to get a word count on your favorite books, but yeah, just try not to make it too long. But obviously, if your writing is great and your book is good, and an editor falls in love with it, or an agent falls in love with it, then they're going to help you carve it up as well. So make the book ultimately, I would say, as long as it needs to be for you, and yeah, you'll get the help you need.
Anybody else have anything to add?
I guess in general. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go for it, Megan.
No, you go. I've talked enough. You go.
For me, I guess one thing that I've found helpful, and I also try to remind myself about, is paying attention to the emotional landscape of the book. So not the emotional landscape of, like, I think, like, you as the author, sometimes we forget, like, we're so invested in the characters and what we want the readers to feel. But I think sometimes as the author, I think all of us are natural storytellers, every single one of us. And we have this gut feeling of when we get this spark of enjoyment, of a rush of exhilaration when you're reading a scene where, like, the music of the word just comes through. And I think sometimes as writers, as we try to chase these deadlines, as we try to find these word counts, sometimes we get so into it that we forget the music. And so sometimes it's just taking that step back and, like, reconnecting of, like, why you're writing this story in the first place, the emotional landscape, and what it means to you as a writer. And I think that kind of, like, will reinvigorate, hopefully, the writing once again, and help you feel more excited about, the book and pushing through NaNoWriMo, which, can always be very frustrating.
Megan or Erin, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
If you're looking for sort of concrete things you can do to actually add words to text, one thing I like to do when I'm going through my scenes is, excuse me, check to see, I look for, if I'm doing descriptions, so a place, I look for a balance of portrait and movement in the scene, and I make the distinction between, a portrait is just sort of an overall description of a scene or what a person's wearing, and a movement paragraph, a movement description is taking you through it piece by piece. It's walking through a room. As you walk through the room, what do you touch? What do you experience? What do you smell? What do you feel in order? And the movement paragraphs are usually a little more interesting from a pacing perspective. But if you've had a lot of really fast, lightning quick scenes, it might be nice to have a portrait scene instead. So when you're looking to sort of add this stuff in, keeping that balance is a good thing to keep in mind. And it can give you kind of fun ways to play with scenes, and just rewrite them both ways to see which one works better.
I think the only other thing I would add is that for a lot of this stuff, it can be very beneficial to have someone that you have sort of a relationship with, where you trade stuff, where they can read what you've written, because especially if you're just looking at purely adding words, there is probably something that that you forget to do, right? I am like Megan. I forget to describe the room people are standing in. Very much describe the emotional experiences of the character and like what's on the walls, but I don't know. And I don't see it. And especially if you've been looking at this book every day for a month, you probably can't see it either. And it might be something else. It might be you're forgetting the emotional reactions. It might be that, you're skimming the dialogue, or you're avoiding something else. There are possibly pieces that in your first pass on this story, you just don't see that they're missing. So having some other eyes on it is a good way to sort of get a different perspective to tell you, hey, your story is lacking this facet that would make it really sing.
I think also you can look at certain characters and just say, could I add anything to this character that would make them more interesting or more sympathetic or more complex? For instance, in Kings of the Wild, there was a character called Moog, who's like a wizard in search of a cure for a disease that killed his husband. And when that book was sold, that was it. And it wasn't until the final editing that I was like, oh, Moog could have the disease, which makes everything a bit more intimate, a bit more immediate, and made his character a lot more complex, and the relationship with the people around him that much more complex. And that's something that when I had to add those words, that definitely gave me at least a chapter's worth of extra stuff in there.
That sounds like all great advice. I think we're going to move on to the Q&A portion. And so the top voted question, and there may not be a definitive answer to this, but in your experience, what is the average preferred word length range for an SFF novel in publishing, and at what point in the writing editing process do you start thinking about fitting your novel into that range?
Thank you for putting the question up on screen, by the way.
Thanks.
Whoever would like to.
So, I can only speak professionally for space opera, because that is what I've published. And I know that my editor, Reed, has tweeted at least once that she prefers secondary worlds of any kind, so your big epic fantasies, your big space operas, that kind of thing. Anything that requires an extensive amount of world building, that be around 120K. And if it's not quite there, then it's probably thin. Somewhere the world building is missing. It might have been 130, but it was in that range. And that is not something I think about while drafting. I'll say 100%. When I'm drafting, it's all like I plot ahead of time, but otherwise it's all vibes and voice and rhythm, and it's like I'm just feeling it. When I have to edit it to something, that my editor will like, then I start thinking about it. Yeah, but it very much depends on the genre.
Yeah, I think it's very subjective, not only among editors, but among readers as well. I know that when Orbit picked me up, they just happened to be in, I think, a bit of a phase for however many months it lasted, that they wanted to try out chunkier books for a little bit. So that's why I just happened to fall in that, and thankfully, because it made it a lot better. But I feel like 120K is something good to aim for. Obviously, a little bit bigger is fine, a little bit smaller is fine. Yeah, I mean, I love to get stuck into a huge book, but at the same time, as a reader, I do find myself daunted by massive books. When the time crunch comes. Maybe when I was a teenager and I had no other obligations, I didn't mind. But as an adult, the smaller the better. But not too small that it doesn't seem like a good value for your money. So, write a book that you would pay $40 hardcover for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. It isn't something I think that I necessarily think about. Obviously, should have thought of it more the first time. But there is a sort of like I feel like I've gotten a point where I kind of have a sense of how big an idea is. Like this idea is going to be like 115 to 130. Well, this idea is a 200K idea, so maybe this is for a different thing. But I do think that point that a big chunky book that you meet Nick, a big chunky book requires a certain kind of reader and a certain amount of trust. Because if I don't know you and you're trying to tell me to read this 600,000 word book, I'm gonna look for look for feedback because it is a lot and you're asking people for a lot. But that can still be a great story. Maybe not your first story.
Yeah, I would just repeat what everyone else said. I think it's subjective to editor. Like, I thought mine was pretty chunky. It was slim because of page size on KDP, but my editor wanted it to be even chunkier. So, and maybe if I was with another editor, maybe they would have asked me something. So it really depends on who you end up with, what publisher you end up with.
So this next question is, if you're adding subplots to bulk up word count, how do you keep from overwhelming your reader with too many subplots? For example, how do you balance one main plot and two subplots, or maybe more than that?
I think it kind of goes back to, Aparna, I think you were the one talking about things thematically resonating, although correct me if I've gotten mixed up. That having those sort of plots and subplots kind of mirror each other or talk to each other, so that they're all pointing in the same direction. They're telling the same kind of whole story. Your reader can kind of braid them together as they go, and it doesn't feel as overwhelming as if you have kind of your main story and then you have these like random asides that are just there to sort of take up space. Oh, sorry, I talk a lot with my hands. Take up space and spread everything out, right? If you have a subplot that's sort of talking about the same theme but in a different way, your story can carry that a lot farther. So the more you add those, the more I think they have to kind of point back in the same direction. They'll still take up space, but they won't take up as much like mental load for your reader.
I think Megan, I think that maybe that was your point about the villain and the MC.
Yeah, the thematic resonance.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. I mean, we were on the same wavelength, so yeah.
No, it's interesting this question is brought up because I actually added a subplot. So when I added more words to the book, because I felt like it would just make this main character a little bit more dynamic. And I think going back to what Erin said about it having like the subplot still relate to the main plot in terms of themes. So a lot of what the Phoenix King discusses is power and religion. And so the subplot of, that was added really much talks about power and religion, but how this one character sees it and what she does to undermine this, a very a strong religious organization. And so I think like when you're adding to the book to either make things more dynamic or to give a character more depth, I think like you have to bring into conversation what are the main themes of your book, or more so like that emotional landscape for you as a writer, what makes you excited about that story. And I think once you can center yourself on those topics, then I think when you add subplots and you intertwine them with the main plot, you can, like, okay, if I want to talk about, say, colonialism and anti-imperialism in my book, one character may view it this way and go about this route of action to undermine the empire. This character might actually support the empire and has this subplot of trying to rise through the ranks of the officers. I don't know, but that's where you as a writer can kind of navigate that space.
Yeah, I think that was all sound advice. I have nothing to add. I don't know much about subplots. I try to stay clear of them.
No worries.
That's your advice. Don't. That's it.
Yeah, just focus on the main plot first. Nail it. Yeah.
So I think this is a funny question. Adding description is a classic way to bring up your word count. How do you avoid adding too much description while still being vivid? For example, Pratchett versus Tolkien is the way that this person thinks about it. It sounds like some of you have the opposite problem, but I'll let
I
you
don't
go
understand the
ahead.
question. What's too much description? So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely guilty of an info dump here and there, especially when it comes to just getting stuff out of the way very quickly. For me, luckily, it was couched in a book that tries at least to be funny, so I could just add a joke at the end or something that was like seemed self-deprecating or something that relate like what I was describing back to the character and have them make an observation about it. That enabled me to couch kind of like those info dump stuff into the story. And I mean, in my books, I tend to just kind of get it out of the way and get the larger stuff into chunks. Because there's once in a while I read a book and I love a good info dump now and then. Obviously, you don't want it on page one, but sometimes, yeah, I settle in for those things. I love them. I think a lot of fantasy readers do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
I think as a reader, you love when the writer gets to nerd out because you're like, yes, like I
yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to put some tea on. Let me just.
You know, like I think it's. I appreciate a great info dump. I think sometimes it runs on too long. I think one trick that I've learned is like reading the scene out loud, and once you start getting tired of hearing more about the way this city looks, that's your cue of like, okay, maybe I should start whittling down some of the description. So I tried to like read my passage aloud, and if I can tell when I'm starting to get bored, I'm like, okay, I need to come in and cut a few things.
For me, it's usually about about rhythm and voice. So the character's voice needs to be coming through. Hopefully the reader is in it because I think the character has some sort of interesting point of view of the world they're experiencing. So making sure that everything is filtered through that voice, and that even though, I'm writing in third person most of the time, I want it to sound almost like first person. Like I want it to be like you could hear the character thinking those thoughts. And as for rhythm, this is the nitty-gritty of like sentence structure. Like how does it sound? Is it interesting? Are all the sentences the same length? Are they all the same type of sentence? If that's the case, break it up, change it, move stuff around. And that comes back to reading out loud, which is a really, really good piece of advice. If you are ever you should try to read all of your work out loud anyway. I lose my voice when I do this, but I still try. But it really illustrates your text to you in a way that you can't get otherwise. Yeah, it's really highly recommended.
This is another funny question, especially being sort of on the my side of things. But maybe just from again what your experiences are. Do publishers prefer a singular novel from a first-time SFF writer, or do duologies and trilogies have a hard time being sold?
Beats me.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Megan said something about earlier about the standalone with series potential. Also, like the point you just made about the filtering the info dumps through the character's voice was I wish I'd said that. That was the best. Do that. That's what I meant to say. But yeah, it beats me. I heard the other day that duologies are in. So, but that's just what I heard on a podcast. So
must be true.
You tell us, Angela.
Duology in and out like every 6 months, and I'm never sure which one it is.
I mean, I'd certainly love to see more standalones. I think they're coming, but I would love to see more of them.
I've got one coming out.
Perfect.
Let's see. I'm going through the questions. Here's another question. What is the best way to get started when you're feeling stuck? Whoever would like to.
Depending on where you are when you get stuck, I think that jumping in and writing the part you're excited about is a great way to sort of get the engine going. If I'm in the middle and I get stuck, I often use the trick of sort of changing the way I'm writing it in like a separate document. Like I will take this scene and I will write it. It's supposed to be third person past. I'm going to write it in first person present. I'm gonna I'm gonna do like a stream of consciousness thing, or just something that will sort of take whatever the shape of the thing I'm trying to make is. I will take it out of it so that I'm not getting up in my own head about whatever it is, which might also be something like just finding someone and explaining out loud, here's what I'm trying to do, because for some reason taking it off of the page and over here kind of gets me out of that kind of blocked in, boxed in kind of space.
Anyone else?
For me, I find, I'm a terrible person to talk about this at the moment, but I find that if I'm stuck in the middle of a book, it's often, and this is only from personal experience, but I do have to, I've gone wrong somewhere shortly before that when things were flowing. So I'll go back a chapter and be like, do I just need to totally change what I've been happening? And that's worked for me quite a few times. And then, as Erin said, like talking to people about it, because sometimes, I talk to my brother about it, or my stuff, quite a bit, and use him as a sounding board. He'll come up with ideas or challenge the ideas that I've got. And if I find myself like ardently defending them, then I maybe know that's a good idea. But if I'm just like, yeah, you're right, then I maybe know that he's onto something, and I need to change the way I've been thinking about it.
Megan or Aparna, do you have anything to add?
I guess I would just go back on to what Erin said about finding that that moment in the book that really excites you, and just kind of like going back. One thing that I remember a professor told me back in college, a trick that he did that I sometimes do if I am dreading the page, is like turning your screen brightness down all the way and then like lowering your screen. So you're not even looking as you're typing, you just start typing. And I think it takes the fear away of like the page is shit. Like the words that I'm putting down is shit. However, I can't see it, so therefore it does not exist. So so I found that to be a little bit helpful, where I'm like, I feel stuck. I don't know where to go next. I'll usually like lower the screen and just write the what I imagine would make the scene more exciting for me. And I think that's just and I'll go back and I'll find little nuggets, and that will usually spark some of the momentum that I need.
Wow, that's really cool. And that's how I ended up with a book written in all caps.
Yeah.
There's this really old, it's like a live keyboard kind of thing called, it's the Alpha Smart Neo. Is that what it's called? I don't know if anyone's familiar with this. Mm-hmm. It was like, the era of clear electronics, that kind of time period. But it's just a keyboard, and it's got like this tiny little screen about like this, like a label maker screen. And you can just type straight into it, and it saves it to its internal drive, and you can upload it to your computer later. Oh. And there's so many writers who swear by this thing, because it just takes away like the self-edit as you go. Like you're saying, you can do the same trick with your monitor. But yeah, I think you can still get them on the used market.
So I think Fonda Lee posted about it like a couple months ago that she got one, and I was like, wow. Yeah, Alpha Smart.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we've talked a little bit about this already, but this question is, in what situation would you need more words? And how do you know more words need to be added to your story? I know a lot of you have had like editors or beta readers tell you need to add more words to your story for various reasons, but maybe instead answer the question in like if you felt yourself needed more words. Did I stray too far from the question?
No,
I always know I need more words. It's short. I know it's short. I'm gonna tell on myself here. Angelica, I hope you're not watching this. I'm waiting for developmental edits back on the standalone that I just turned in, which I know should probably be about 120,000 words. It's about 84 right now. So I'm awaiting the inevitable. Hey, Megan, you need more in this book.
Yeah, can't wait for the second half.
Looking a little thin there. But I think a lot of it, sometimes I just need space from the text. Like you can get it. That's like honestly, that is my best editing advice forever, hands down. Is walk away for a couple weeks and come back later, and then you'll know.
Yeah, and if you've written something that that is pretty bare bones and pretty plot heavy and just like go, then you can always add scenes. I mean, I know a lot of new writers get told don't have a scene that exists if it doesn't need to, if it doesn't further the plot in some way, which is complete utter bullshit. Obviously, that's something to like aspire to, but as much as you love a good info dump, people also love a good just like characters sitting around getting to know each other, and you getting to know the characters and doing little things and human things and intimate things and things that don't drive the plot forward, but things that when those characters are asked, whether at the end of the book to make sacrifices, that you care about them more. So add some little scenes in there that don't have anything to do with the plot. And don't tell your editor I said that.
I love that, Nick. It makes Thanks. Me like it also makes you think of like the narrative structures that Western media usually follows in, like the 3-act structure, the hero's journey, but there's so many other kinds of story structures, the 4 acts, the 5 acts, the Bollywood movies have random songs, not random, but they just have song and dance thrown in, and you're just like, this adds nothing to the plot, but I'm here for the vibes, and it's so much fun. So I just sometimes some novels need to be more like Bollywood movies. You just need to have some flair of song and dance, and it's just great.
Erin, did you have anything to add?
I feel like I want that to be the last line.
Though. Okay.
Like Bollywood movies.
So my final question is from myself, just to wrap up the session. What can you all speak a little bit about what you're working on currently?
Well, I am working on book 2 of The Phoenix King, so the sequel, which was due. The draft was due to Angelica on Monday. She will get it on Friday.
Angelica should not be watching this.
You're
not allowed.
I'm just formatting everything into a Word doc, so we're slowly getting there.
I finished up the second book of the Books of the Usurper series, Relics of Ruin, which comes out in April earlier this month. So I'm starting book 3, which might be called Sigils of Sacrifice. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but anyway.
I'm working on book 3 of The Band, as I have been every day since I finished book 2 of The Band.
And when was that, Nick?
Definitely not playing years ago. Yeah. I also started writing some comics, but according to Orbit, I'm only working on book 2 of The Band. Book 3, sorry, of The Band. Called Outlaw Empire, which I am allowed to say.
According to Orbit, I'm free at the moment. I just turned in final questions on First Pass Pages for the 3rd book in the Devoured Worlds trilogy. I'm waiting for the developmental edits for the standalone, should be coming close to the end of the year. It has a title. I've been told that title will be workshopped. So it is space opera, sapphic space pirates, big stained glass superstructures left over by an extinct alien species, and it's been a lot of fun to write. But while I'm waiting for that, I'm working on restructuring and editing last year's NaNoWriMo for me, which was And Then There Were None in Space. in which the
Mm.
artificial intelligence of the spaceship itself is one of the invited guests to the dinner party, in which everyone is definitely going to die. So that has been
Spoilers.
Yeah,
I'm very
I mean, it's
excited.
and then there were none. Like, come on, they're all gonna die, right?
Oh, thank you so much, everyone. We're at time. Thank you to our authors for sharing their experiences and their wisdom. Thank you to everyone who joined us today, and we hope this event and all the events in this series has been helpful for your writing endeavors. And again, if you want to rewatch this event, the replay will be available right here in just a few minutes. And the greeting button below has links to buy all the authors' books, and also a link to the event series homepage where you can find a list of all the events and the direct links to replay them. All the videos will also be available to watch on the Orbit Books YouTube channel and a handy How to Write Your First SFF novel playlist. And thank you again to all our authors and to everyone for joining us today. Good luck with all your novels. Bye.
Yeah, thanks for hosting this. Bye.
Yeah.